seat. That means that we need to see some kind of
all right,
change.
Sheila, I have to stop you. This time it is Sheila. Yes. So there we have it. The presidential candidate and Deputy President William Ruto arriving there. And Rashid Abdallah is on standby. Rashid, kazi kwako.
Bila shaka Joageo, ni kwamba ule muda ambao tulikuwa tunausubiri wa wale waniaji urais umefika kwa hivi sasa. Akiwa kwanza kufika ni mwaniaji urais kwa tiketi ya UDA chini ya mwamvuli wa Kenya Kwanza, ambaye si mwingine bali naibu rais William Samoei Ruto, ukipenda daktari, ambaye amefika katika muda huu angalau kuja kuzungumza na wananchi ili aweze kuweka ajenda zake paruanja, manifesto zake zieleweke katika mjadala katika siku hii ya leo. Kwa hiyo kwa hivi sasa tutakuwa tunamsubiri. Kumbuka ni mjadala wa pili, wa kwanza umeweza kukamilika ambapo David Waiga Mwaure ameweza kueleza ajenda zake baada ya Profesa George Wajakoya kufika na baadaye kughairi kutoshiriki mjadala kwa sababu ambazo ziko nje ya uwezo wetu. Katika awamu hii ya pili itakuwa ni zamu ya naibu wa rais William Samoei Ruto akiingia katika mjadala na aliyekuwa waziri mkuu Raila Amolo Odinga. Lakini kwa hivi sasa Joageo, ni fursa ya kipekee kuweza kuzungumza naye, maana kumbuka ameweza kuandamana na watu wawili muhimu sana katika chama cha UDA wakati ule kule Kasarani, wakileta ajenda ya kwamba kama wanaafiki William Samoei Ruto kuwa mgombeaji wa urais kwa tiketi ya UDA. Yupo mama mboga mmoja aliweza kutoa swali hilo na mtu mmoja wa bodaboda akaweza kuidhinisha na kukubaliana hilo. Hivyo basi watu wao wawili ndio wale ambao wameandamana nao katika siku leo pamoja na mkewe na familia yake. Kwa hiyo utanipa nafasi kwa hivi sasa kwa dakika moja tuweze kuzungumza na naibu wa rais ambaye amefika hapa. Shukrani sana naibu wa rais kuweza kufika katika siku hii ya leo. Hii ni siku ambayo ina umuhimu sana kwa kwako, manake umesitisha kampeni zako ukasema siku ya leo ni siku ya mjadala. Ina umuhimu gani kwako, kwa chama, kwa muungano na kwa taifa?
Leo ni siku ya muhimu kwa sababu tumekuja hapa tupate nafasi ya kuongea na Wakenya. Wakenya waweze kujua tarehe 9 mwezi wa 8 wataamka mapema, waende wapige kura na wajue ni kwa nini wanapiga kura, ni upande gani watapiga kura na ni kwa sababu gani. Na ndio leo ni siku ya muhimu kwa sababu tutapata nafasi na wenzangu kujieleza, kueleza manifesto yetu, kueleza misimamo yetu kuhusu mambo ya muhimu yanayowahusu Wakenya na taifa letu kwa ujumla. Tutazungumzia mambo ya uchumi hasa, tutazungumzia mambo ya vile tunaweza kuondoa njaa katika taifa letu la Kenya, vile tunaweza kupunguza gharama ya maisha, vile tutaweza kuzalisha nafasi za ajira za vijana wetu, vile tunaweza kuhakikisha kwamba wakulima wetu wanaweza kuendelea na majukumu yao, na mambo yale mengi muhimu ya matibabu, masomo ya watoto wetu, mambo ya afya. Haya ndio mambo ya muhimu na naamini ya kwamba Wakenya wanangojea kujua ni yapi tulio nayo. Tumewazungumzia pale nyanjani, lakini leo tutapata nafasi mwafaka ya kueleza kinagaubaga yale mambo ambayo tumepanga kwa ajili ya uongozi wa taifa letu.
Labda pende kwa utofauti naibu wa rais ni kwamba umeandamana na naibu mgombea mwenza wa chama, lakini hapa kuna watu wawili ambao walikuwa muhimu katika ule mkutano wa wajumbe wa chama cha UDA. Huyu mama ambaye aliweka swali na yule mtu wa bodaboda za kuidhinisha. Mbona ukawapa kipaumbele katika siku ya leo ya mjadala?
Kwa sababu nimeambatana na wao tangu tuanze hii safari. Huyu mama nilimpata kule Kiambu wakati tulienda kule kwa Economic Forum, na niliona ni mama mwenye ako na maono. Alitoa mchango wake kama vile wa mama wengi na Wakenya wengi wa tabaka mbalimbali. Karibu Wakenya 90,000 walihusika katika kutengeneza manifesto yetu ya Kenya Kwanza, na ni baadhi ya wananchi kama mama huyu na huyu mungwana ambaye pia ni mshirika wetu mkubwa katika chama cha UDA katika muungano wa Kenya Kwanza.
Pengine kwa kauli ambayo anaweza kuitumia kuweza kumalizia kwa yule hasla ambaye anatizama, anatarajia nini sasa hivi kutoka kwa kiongozi wake?
Anatarajia kujua ni vipi yeye ataweza kuweka chakula katika meza, ni vipi mtoto wake anaweza kupata ajira, ni vipi masomo yake ya watoto wake itashughulikiwa, ni vipi kilimo kitashughulikiwa na serikali inayokuja, na ni vipi anaweza kuhakikisha kwamba ako na matibabu na ni mpango gani tulionayo kumshughulikia ili aweze kupata matibabu bila matatizo. Naamini kwamba haya ni baadhi ya mambo Wakenya wanangojea.
Naam, kila laheri katika mjadala. Naam, naibu wa rais William Samoei Ruto, daktari, akisema kwamba katika siku ya leo ashazungumza mengi katika kampeni Joageo, lakini ana fursa ya kipekee kuweza kuyachanganua kwa utaratibu katika mjadala. Hivyo basi ameandamana watu wawili ambao ni muhimu sana katika safari yake yeye kuchaguliwa na kupewa tiketi ya uwaniaji wa rais. Narudi kwako ili Wakenya wapate fursa baadaye ya kujua mengi na wachanganuzi matarajio yao na hoja ambazo ni muhimu kujadiliwa katika siku hii ya leo Joageo.
Shukran. Rashid Abdallah there speaking to the Deputy President who is the UDA presidential candidate in the Kenya Kwanza coalition in this election that is now just 13 days away. Dr. Ruto there talking about what he believes is important for the country and sort of giving a glimpse of what he hopes to talk about during this. And interestingly, Professor Witi arriving with his entourage, which includes the two people we saw who endorsed him, Pauline Waithera and Kelvin Okoth, sort of trying to remind us of what he has been saying out there in campaigns.
Well, the DP is a master of optics, and I think this is just basically one of those instances where he uses to full effect essential imagery just to construct a narrative that endears him more to the ordinary Kenyans, because those two people are very unlikely participants at this level in this country. We don't see ordinary Kenyans flank presidential candidates. But I was just about to say one thing. The reason why ethics, integrity, and values are subordinate in our political discourse and in political organizing is because the basis for political mobilization is still ethnic. If you look at Raila Odinga, he gets onto this stage because he has a strong support of the Luo community. Look at William Ruto, who has built an interesting coalition between his Kalenjin community and the Kikuyus. Mwaura does not have that luxury. And therefore, when he rides on values, Kenyans are not paying attention, because what brings us to this stage to even then invite these conversations are not the important things. These things come afterwards. And this ethnic political mobilization is a huge problem that we have to deal with.
But Ruto has been saying this many times that this election is about the economy and all of these things. And some people say that the ethnic question is not as pronounced in this election as it has been previously. Do you agree?
It is still a very strong undertone. It is the bastion that you got to start with. And when you see even your colleagues in the media basically trying to figure out how the electoral process is going to go, you always start with what you call the quote-unquote strongholds. In that entourage of Raila Odinga is Kalonzo Musyoka, okay, bringing in the big Kamba vote. In that entourage is the governor of Kakamega, bringing in the Luhya vote. And so you see this ethnic bifurcation being a very critical point of mobilization. So issues that are substantive to the citizens of this country, such as unemployment. How come we don't see youth mobilizing around the unemployment question? That even Mwaura today was just deplorable in the way that he handled it. He had no great ideas. And even Deputy President William Ruto and even Raila Odinga, nobody has any clue about how to mobilize the economic resources of this country to then create the traction that leads to jobs. We still imagine that if you're going to give us handouts in terms of grants and loans, that every young people can start a business. They don't want a business. They want jobs like you and I. They want jobs like the one that Ruto is seeking, not the jobs like their MPs. This economy of bringing your own job is not working. It never builds economies.
And that's a good place, Wanjiru, to kind of segue into this next debate that we are going to have in about 20 minutes' time, where we actually have two campaigns, markedly different in the platforms on which they are running. Both of them saying that it is the economy is stupid, as one American president said, but approaching this economy from very different directions. I wonder what you have heard and what contrasts or similarities you see in the overall platforms of the two main formations that we are about to receive. Hopefully we get both of them.
Right. So
from my point of view, I think in terms of economy, there's been, and the manifestos, there's a win for Kenyans because there's a recognition of the importance of economy. Both manifestos bring out, of course, the economic issue as the primary one. The language is different, the way they've structured their manifestos is different, but they prioritize agriculture, where a majority of Kenyans are employed. They then recognize that a majority of Kenyans are also in the informal sector. And with Azimio, they try and link agriculture to manufacturing, to the informal sector, trying to really take a holistic look at saying if that's where people are employed, that's where we need to put money, we then need to add value, we then need to do marketing and therefore create jobs. So there's a very intentional effort to go back to what the economy needs. On the UDA side, KK side, they've also done the same. They've also prioritized agriculture. They've also prioritized MSMEs, looking at the informal sector. They've linked that to manufacturing. They also prioritize ICT. So in terms of the priority sectors, you can say they have prioritized both of them and recognize, using different language, that trickle-down economics is not working, that you really need to engage the majority and be meaningful in that way. So one, in terms of the broad economic priorities, I think they're on the same page. A slight difference because Kenya Kwanza takes more of an enterprise, social enterprise approach, whereas the Azimio takes more of a social democratic development approach, more welfare approach. But in principle, they have a good sell. And as manifestos go, much as we have, we're very cynical about them, we must remember that Jubilee Manifesto was a kind of a jumble of projects that they tried to implement and essentially broke the economy. So we must hold these, whichever side gets in, and even the side that's in the opposition to their promise. But the big difference for me is in terms of the values foundation. Azimio makes is very explicit actually in terms of democracy, social justice, citizen engagement, putting public participation, civic engagement, as part of as part of their approach. So you see their democratic human rights-based approach. They have a section on governance. Their proposals are not as replete, but they do touch on leadership and integrity, ethics, anti-corruption. They go the whole gambit. But when you look at Kenya Kwanza, it's missing in terms of the values foundation. And their approach to governance is to strengthen institutions, which is good in itself, but really that's a basic, public, one, it's based in the constitution, strengthens those institutions because they're focusing a lot on the oversight institutions, giving them enough money, giving them independence. That's the constitutional position. But they do not touch leadership and integrity. So, and you understand why.
And I want us to discuss that emerging dichotomy, whether that's something that we can look forward to in the coming elections. But Dennis, I wonder what fundamental differences, briefly, do you see between the two platforms that have been presented to us by Azimio and Kenya Kwanza?
Do you want us to close the Maori debate? Because I think there's still some issues that we didn't cover.
Well, we could go that all night long, but we have only 20 minutes for the next debate. So in fact, it is less now.
To say something quickly?
Yeah, I wanted to say something very quickly. I think either...
Dennis, is that you donating your time to him?
I'm donating 1 minute to him.
1 minute to me. So
1 minute to him.
It's about Wajakoya and facts. He has a very, very strange relationship with facts. And I feel really uncomfortable trusting him at the helm of government. He does not understand. He calls us a wealthy nation. Our revenue yield in 2020-2021 was just 1.6 trillion. In 2021-2022, by June, July to June this year, we're at 2.03. Our budget estimates at 3 trillion. I don't understand where he gets this notion that we're a very wealthy nation. We're really struggling with a huge debt overhang. His proposals about agriculture are really fantastic in an imaginary way. He has got a very agrarian fixation with agriculture. He has no idea about how pastoralism works. His whole fixation about agriculture is throw fertilizer in the soil. So I think this very flippant relationship with facts really undermines the credibility of his candidacy, especially when you want to trust him at an executive level to actually run a state bureaucracy.
And probably that would have been great to ask him had he showed up or had he stayed back and you make a great point. But Dennis, you were talking about
thanks, Dennis, for the
these
donation.
two formations, and I don't know how many of your minutes are left, but
just in general terms, I think I get the sense Azimio comes across as more looking at the production side, whereas Kenya Kwanza is looking at the market side. They talk about value chains. I think they built their whole manifesto around value chains. Kenya Kwanza. There was a very good differentiation someone made about the two. Azimio is more towards welfare society, whereas KK is towards fair society. So there's a kind of fairness. For me, and then I think Azimio's is very much, there's a social charter. There's a social charter, social contract. I think that's what Wanjiru was saying. KK is very much empowerment. So it's about empowering people. And of course, the detail is different. I think there's some innovative things. I think KK has gone much deeper into things of public finance, talking about securitizing pending bills, an infrastructure bank. You know, they've gone into much more detail on the public finance side. So they're a bit specific on that. But I take Wanjiru's point, by the way. I think there's an important point on the governance. They've instrumentalized it. So there's no underpinning philosophy. Yeah. It's about instruments. Governance is an instrument, right? There are no underpinning values. I think that's a very important point, especially since, in fact, I wanted to make this point. In the forward to the manifesto, the Deputy President says he wants to do three things. Defend the Constitution, institutionalize our politics, and create jobs. It would be very interesting to see what that means.
Okay, Sheila, you haven't said anything. I don't know what you see in front of us if any of these two people were to get to power. What distinctions do you see, especially from where you sit?
Well, first, I just want to, if I reflect back on the Jubilee Manifesto and why there were some, can I call them, some promises were dead on arrival, was because they really didn't look at the legislative and policy institutional framework. What is the current framework? That's something that I feel a lot of them are not looking at even as they make certain promises, and that is where a lot of them will struggle. So all the promises, when you look at Kenya Kwanza, Azimio, Agano, some for Jacoya, I don't agree with many of them, but they're good. They're good. I mean, if they're good in an ideal world, but then the practicalities of what is the current framework, both institutional policy and legislative for a country that they're not looking at, particularly when I look at, can I go back to my pet topic on corruption?
Yes, yeah.
And I, like, for instance, like the DP is talking about giving financial and operational independence to institutions like, those responsible for fighting corruption, the judiciary, and so on, which is good, and which, as we have said, has been a problem, that most of these don't have the resources and even the independence, the muscle to be able to operate. But then there are certain challenges that we've seen, and I've not heard them talk about how they will address some of these challenges to their institutional, functional, financial independence of these institutions. Yeah. But for me, primarily as well, I think that when it comes to the issues around corruption, I still feel like they've looked so much on the issues around enforcement, but we are not looking at prevention. And for as long as we are not looking at fighting corruption from a prevention lens, we'll always be fighting.
Okay.
Yeah, and chasing after the money. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how they will actually prevent. And one classic way of starting to prevent corruption is by ensuring that people who have been accused, there I go with my song,
Yeah.
people who have been accused of corruption don't get anywhere near public office.
Okay, so Hudson, you have only 1 minute, within which we hope someone will arrive. But you have the last word on this one before we take the break to go to the
maybe allow me to keep speaking until somebody shows up, right?
You have exactly 1 minute.
Yeah, I think what folks have said is, I would agree with much of what everybody said. I think, 6 months ago, there was no galvanizing idea in the political space. I think we now have some ideas that are fairly cogent, they're clear, they're inspirational, they're aspirational. Of course, we're waiting to see budgets and schedules and the first 100 days, first 180 days and so on. But I think the harder questions will be, for example, what do we do with the parastatals that continue to drain the coffers? What are we going to do with the fact that we have huge recurrent expenditure bills in terms of staffing? Okay. What are we going to do with this pension that Jubilee had, which was to create infrastructure everywhere?
And I think
so. These are some of the challenges.
And we can only get some of those questions, hopefully, inside the hall, because we want to take that break right now. And when we come back in the next couple of minutes, we'll be inside the auditorium to hear what the candidate who's arrived has for us, hoping that the other one will arrive at some point. But here we are, taking that break for the second and final debate of the night.
Lean